I love this series so goddamn much, man. It's so good. Oh my goodness, this episode basically combined everything that I've wanted from this series so far. It had great comedy, visceral action, quiet, ambient moments that build the atmosphere and the characters, but above all of that, what it had for me that really brought the whole episode together was a really nice and endearing emotional core that makes you like these characters even more. Hello everybody, I am Phenom Sage, and welcome back to another Chainsaw Man episode review. Today we are going to be talking about episode 3, MEOWY'S Whereabouts, baby. And it's hard to know where to really start here because I really did love so many facets of what made this entire episode so great, but I think where I do want to start here is that emotional core of the episode, this history and internal conflict for Power's character that ends up really making her even more likable and relatable to the audience, but also more likable and relatable to Denji. I mean, it's not a stretch to say that these two characters clearly did not get along from the beginning of the episode and even from last week's episode. And while I won't say that they're suddenly going to be best friends by the beginning of next episode, I really do think the events in this one, the entire conflict with MEOWY and the Bat Devil, really helped Denji and Power understand and relate to each other more than they did from the start. I like how what brings them together in this episode is what has been established from the beginning of the series to be Denji's kind of emotional vulnerability, the concept of having a pet be your only companion and attachment to the world. And I've already seen some complaints that the whole deal with Power in this episode does seem a bit recycly and oversimplistic when we already had Denji's whole scenario in the very first episode. But I think that works beautifully as this unifying theme that ends up letting these characters connect, and I think the mangaka, Fujimoto, also understood this from the beginning because even in this very episode, Power says to Denji, "I bet you don't understand putting this much value and existential weight into a cat." And Denji says, "No, that's dumb as hell, but I would understand if you were talking about a dog." Just really, really great character moments brought about by this relatively simple conflict of just wanting to save a pet. Plus, I'm just a cat guy in general, so that did some extra damage on me. Despite how relatively simple and kind of uninspired that whole save the cat situation was though, I think what brought it to life, what made it hit a lot harder than it would have in the hands of somebody else, was the more understated execution of the emotional beats and the climaxes. For example, by the end of the episode, Power has fulfilled her end of the deal. She brought the Bat Devil a human to eat, and she expects MEOWY to be let go in return. However, of course, the Bat Devil is going to be a piece of shit. He eats MEOWY right in front of her, and what I loved about this scene was how blunt and how quiet it was. In another story, in another anime, you would have the scriptwriter saying, okay, we've put Power at her lowest point in this episode, now we have to see her breaking down, now we have to see her crying her eyes out, we need her screaming in pain, but Chainsaw Man handles it differently. Chainsaw Man handles it in a way that is befitting of the overall tone and character that it's been establishing this entire time. Power simply just watches in shock and awe as the cat that she's been fighting to save this entire time is eaten. You've got this beautiful, quiet, melancholic Kensuke Ushio soundtrack in the background, and slowly she just turns her head toward Denji and tells him, "I understand what you meant now." This is an awful feeling. And I absolutely love everything about the execution in this scene because it just communicates that despair and soul-crushing feeling that's going through Power at that moment with this deliberately small amount of expression and dialogue. It's just so goddamn well done. And I know it's still early days, maybe I can't exactly say this yet, but it feels like a trademark Chainsaw Man thing to do with these emotional moments. Speaking of the trademark Chainsaw Man thing to do though, I really feel like I'm getting a handle and an understanding of the tone in this series, at least what the anime is trying to do. I still need to do further research as far as if the anime is conveying the manga in the right way, but one thing I love about Chainsaw Man's tone, and something that's really conveyed in this episode nicely, is the overall quiet sense of dread that seems to be looming in every single scene. This is a supremely ambient-driven story, and I feel like I understood that aspect the most near the end of the episode when the Bat Devil is perched on the house and just overlooking the city. He starts contemplating what humans he's going to eat first, which ones he's going to have for the appetizer, which ones he's going to have for the main course, and it really does communicate that idea of horror and inevitable terror that exists in this world, ready to kill people at a moment's notice. And yeah, he did turn out to be a jobber in the end, but that doesn't really change how awesome and scary his overall presence was in this episode. In no small part thanks to the devil designer that I mentioned in a previous review, Kiyotaka Oshiyama, dude. That dude is still doing glorious work on this series, and I can't wait to see what other devils are left for us in the rest. And that leads me into the next thing that I really want to talk about in this episode. The goddamn production, man. At this point, as a viewer, you might as well expect greatness in every single episode of Chainsaw Man, because they simply have not let up when it comes to the animation, direction, compositing. Pretty much every facet of the production of these episodes is simply superb. They just have a really strong grasp of what makes a series look good, and it goes without saying that in this episode, that continued to be the case. I loved the framing and uses of color to convey the mood of the scenes. I loved the shading and how detailed all of the character artwork was. I loved how big the action felt. The scene where the Bat Devil is flying toward the city and Denji just transforms while being held onto him in mid-air. Just so sick, dude. And while I doubt a lot of people will notice a huge difference in quality between this episode and the previous ones, I actually did want to give a special shout out to the main man responsible for this episode, Hironori Tanaka, dude. This guy has been a legend in the industry for a pretty long time now. The dude has produced some of the best animated sequences of all time. You probably know him from his work on other anime and even his own directorial work on a Jujutsu Kaisen episode a while back, and he is the one who directed, storyboarded, corrected, and even did a large part of the main key animation work in this episode. And again, while I don't think a regular viewer will pick up on the differences between this episode and some of the previous ones, I do just want to show you a few images that display his work and corrections in this episode very clearly, because I know for a fact that while we still haven't seen the best that Chainsaw Man as a series will offer, the wonderful thing about anime and the wonderful thing about these prolific creators being involved in these anime is that I am positive that you will not see another episode in this series that has drawings and action and ambience that feels and looks the way that it does in this episode. Going back to characters, there obviously were very blatant and straightforward things that we learned about Denji and Power in this episode. Some would even say simplistic and hitting you over the head with them. I wouldn't go that far myself, but what stood out to me arguably more about them in this episode were the understated, smaller moments that left me asking questions about both of them, and it primarily came down to two different scenes. One of them is at the very beginning of the episode. Makima is kind of reprimanding them for killing a devil that was already under a civilian hunter's jurisdiction, which already kind of raises some weird questions about why the two of them would be arrested when no civilian hunter was around to take care of that demon, and it's literally the Public Safety Bureau's job. But maybe that's something that will be fleshed out later. But what stood out to me more was Power's disposition and reaction to everything that Makima was saying. This isn't just a normal being respectful and scared of your boss kind of reaction. This is genuine, down to your bones fear. Power seems like she is scared for her life every single time Makima tells her something, and I find this really fascinating because one, it implies that Makima has either done or said something to Power that gives her the impression that she should be that afraid of her, and two, it ties back into what I was mentioning last episode about the ways that Makima controls people. We've already seen that Denji and even possibly Aki are in love and adore Makima, and I posed the question, is it possible that Makima's seduction and allure works on the female members that work underneath her as well? And it seems like in Power's case, it's not so much about charm and seduction as it is just outright fear. So to me, that's really interesting as far as Makima's character goes and the other different methods that she uses to control the people underneath her. The other thing that stood out to me in this episode, kind of in a not good way, was something Denji does in the fight with the Bat Devil. During this fight, you see Denji is pretty attentive as far as protecting and trying to save the people around him, and the Bat Devil is kind of baffled by this, wondering why a devil would try to save humans. And to me, Denji's character has always come across as someone who does have virtues. He has a moral compass that leads him to do the right things in the right situations. He gave his blood for Pochita, he's doing his best to save the civilians around him in this fight, but there's a point in this fight when the Bat Devil basically calls him crazy for doing that, and Denji in response just throws a car with a human inside of it at the Bat Devil because the person inside was a dude. Now, granted, he ended up getting out just in time, but this one little moment here stood out to me because it felt kind of out of character compared to the Denji that's been established in the story so far. And it made me wonder things about Denji's character. Is Denji kind of an anti-hero that doesn't mind putting people's lives at risk? Was he just being kind of an idiot and stubborn in response to what the Bat Devil was saying? Does he just genuinely not care about the lives of males? I find that kind of hard to believe, considering like a minute beforehand, he went out of his way to save a father and his son. I don't know, man. I'm not jumping to any conclusions. I'm not here to call this a criticism just yet, but it definitely took me by surprise in contrast to how I saw Denji's character beforehand. Little details like these are all over the episode though, and we did learn some interesting lore bits as far as the story and actual world building goes. For one, last episode I was questioning the nature and the foundation of these things known as Fiends. Are they the humans? Are they the devils? Are they a mix of the two? I still don't feel like we have a blatant answer just yet, but this episode did kind of imply that Fiends are the devils that took over the human's body. Nobody's referring to Power as the human that she was in the past, they're only talking about her in the context of the blood devil that she used to be. We'll see if we get any more information on that in the future, but I'm going to just assume that Power and all Fiends really are just the devils that have taken over, and the human body that's left behind is basically just a corpse, which is pretty morbid. We also learned some stuff about devils themselves. Apparently they're being militarized by governments. I don't really have much to say about that right now, other than I'm not surprised. But more interesting to me is something that Makima says about where devils get their power from. Each devil in this series is named after something, right? They're named after something in this world, and that's where they draw their power from. And Makima says something. I don't know if she meant this symbolically, or if this is literally the mechanical foundation for how devil powers work in this shonen, but apparently, the more afraid people are of something, the stronger the devil possessing that ability will be. So far, we've seen a zombie devil, a bat devil, a blood devil, a chainsaw devil, all of these things that would naturally scare people in the real world, and if this is indeed the case of the power of these devils, I wonder theoretically what devil would possess the most power in this world. What thing in this world are people most afraid of? Google tells me it's being social and public speaking, so I assume we're waiting for the last boss social anxiety devil to appear, but in the meantime, I do wonder what other kinds of devils that we can look forward to in this story. The last thing that I wanted to just briefly mention here, I know I haven't really talked about them much in these reviews so far, but this one was just so goddamn awesome that I had to briefly mention it. The ED, man. I know we're getting new EDs for every single episode, that's super sick, I can't wait to see the rest, but I would honestly be okay if this was the only ED we got in the entire series. The vibe is just so good. Maximum the Hormone fits this series perfectly, the visuals are absurdly good, and are actually kind of reminiscent of the artwork and the volume covers of the manga. It's just so cool. I don't know much about the staff behind it other than Studio Maxilla produced it with Yuki Akamiya doing the direction and storyboarding magic. Props to everyone responsible because it turned out ridiculously awesome. Let me know in the comments or in the Discord server linked below the like button what you thought about this week's Chainsaw Man episode. Did you love it as much as I did? Did you hate it for whatever reason? Did you think it was just okay? Always interested in hearing what you guys think about this stuff. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all. and I will see you in the next video.